Hi there and welcome back. So today we're moving on with our sword. We should have the UV complete and the crease is put into place ready for our high poly. So today we're working on sculpting and actually creating a texture for this piece. So as you can see here, I've got my substance painter all laid out with a text with just a couple of materials applied to this piece for our sword. But we can see we've got a lot of nice detail that we've not seen in the previous version, and this is what our Maya scene is currently looking like with two versions of this sword, one our low poly and one our high poly. And what you'll notice with our high poly is we are incredibly high on the geometry count with about 3.7 million polygons on this against our 14,000 tries on our low poly. So we're going to look at how we can improve detail on our piece, and with that actually utilize that detail for a little bit of sculpting within Autodesk Maya. It's not as powerful as say ZBrush, but it's a nice little introduction into how we can utilize this piece. So I'll just turn on my input overlays so we can see them, and let's get down to it. So I'll just go and open up a previous version, which was the version before this was my UV unwrap. So I'll just click open. I'll save this very quickly, and we should be somewhere along this way. I'm just going to hide my references as we don't need those anymore. These are already creased, ready to be subdivided even further. So if I just go press 3, we can see how they're stretching out a little bit. So before we do that though, we're just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. This curve that we used for the creation of our this curve that we used for the creation of our hilt, we don't need anymore, so I'm just going to delete it. We can see that I've not named my blade, so I'm just going to double click that and just call it blade for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to group these three together, so holding control and pressing G for golf, and we're just going to call this sword underscore LP, similar to what we did with our chest. We're going to do a few things differently this time, however, compared to our chest, namely around how we build our high poly. So I'm just going to press Control D, that's D for Delta, to duplicate that group, and I'll just call this sword HP for this group, and I'll hide this low poly group, so holding Control H. With this on our high poly group, we just need to do a few things first, namely we need to increase the subdivision factors. So with that in mind, I'm just going to click my meshes, and I'm going to do these one by one. For my handle, I'm only going to need one subdivision level, so I'm just going to hit smooth, and we're just going to bring it up to 1. That's just going to tighten up all the groupings on our geometry, make everything a little bit cleaner. For our hilt, with this, because of the way that I want to do this, I want to start sculpting some detail into it. We're actually going to add quite a few subdivisions to this. So I'm just going to go to mesh, we're going to go to smooth, and I'm going to bring this up to, let's go to 3 subdivisions. That might seem a bit extreme. It's making this model alone be 180,000 polygons, but this will be really, really helpful for moving through this piece. And we're going to do a similar thing with our sword blade. So I'm just going to go to mesh and smooth, and we're just going to increase the subdivision counts for this. And I'm bringing the sword up quite a bit because I'm going to put an insignia in here from Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, just because I really like those games, and we need a lot of geometry to support that. But that is our high poly meshes sorted from this, which is the most straightforward aspect of this. Now we're going to start utilizing our sculpting tools. So before that, I'm just going to select all my objects. I'm just going to go to edit and delete by type and hit history. We'll get rid of that history. And I'm just going to begin by making sure that I've got my tool settings open. I've anchored them to the side of my workspace. You don't have to. You can just, have them out like that. It's up to you. But we're just going to now go to our sculpt tools. So I'm just going to find up here on my shelf sculpting, and we can start out just by using our sculpt. Now by default, if I reset this, we can see that our values are really quite high. The size of our brush is at 25 units and our strength is at 15. If I just start sculpting this, it's just going to lag and move the entire thing around. So we need to take a little bit of a different approach to this. So first things first, I want to lower the size and I want to lower the strength. And I can tweak them in here, but it's always a nightmare going back and forth between our tools. So with this, we've got 2 hotkeys that we want to make the most of. That is B for Bravo. That's going to allow us to change our actual sizing for our brush. So if I hold B and drag the left mouse button, very similar to soft select, it's just going to allow us to drag our brush size. And we're also going to use M and drag down, and holding M, that's M for Marco, is going to allow us to adjust our actual strength. So now when I sculpt into this, we can see the vertices moving, but it's just allowing us to do some work. Another thing that we're going to do very, very quickly on this is we're actually going to split this in half, because I'm going to use symmetry to work on both of these sides, but it's not going to transfer across the back. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to find the central parting and double click it, and because of the way our geometry is, it's not going to trickle all the way down. So I'm just going to make sure to select. The reason it's not trickling down is because we've got what's called a pole here where multiple edge loops are intersecting. But with that selected, I could just hit that. I'm now going to go to Edit Mesh, and I'm going to find Detach. There it is. And all that's done is it's split that geometry up now. It's now made these two separate components. So I can select one half of this and just press the Delete key and get rid of it. And we're going to mirror this back later. Moving on with this, we're also going to turn on our symmetry and go to Object X. And if I go back to my sculpt tool now, we can see we've got two cursors. I can start actually adjusting points. So something you might want to play around with is our use of stamps and other such points. But for now, I'm just going to start by building up some nice little lines and filigree for this piece. So holding B for Bravo, I'm just going to make my brush quite a bit smaller. And I'm going to do a test hit. I want it a little bit larger. There we go. And what I'm also going to do to make my life a little bit easier is I'm just going to turn on steady stroke. I'll likely do it a bit different, but if we go to our actual 3D model in Substance Painter, you can see I've put this little extrusion all the way around here, and I've got some dashes around here. So that's the sort of thing I'm going to want to do with this. So with that soft select on, I can adjust the distance on that, but what that's going to do is give me a little bit more control for this. So I can just start sculpting in some detail. There we go. And I just want it to be marginally ornate. I quite like my high fantasy, and it's one of the things you see in high fantasy is quite ornate weaponry. So I'm just taking my time going through and sculpting. I might fill that in later and might see how it is. I'm just going to give it another pass, just to make some bits more defined. And this is one of the first barriers you might find with your geometry. I've got pretty good, well distributed geometry, but you can see just around here where I'm trying to carve this detail, we've not actually got enough geometry count. I don't mind it too much, it doesn't look too bad, but it's something to bear in mind as you might go for a slightly higher geometry count for your piece, just so you can sculpt this detail in. That may cause some difficulties when we come to mirror, depending on your hardware. But I'm just going to carry on putting in these little bits of detail here and there. And that steady stroke just makes our life a little bit easier for clearing points. It gives us a little bit more control when we're using a mouse. If you have access to a tablet, do feel free to utilize it. I don't mind using a mouse myself. So I'll just do some more kind of flowing lines through this. Just carving into it. If I do want to carve directly into the piece, I have that option. All I need to do is just go to my strength and hit invert. And this is going to allow me to start carving into the mesh as well. Whether you decide to do that is at your discretion. For me, I'm just adding little bits of detail where I see fit. But there's no real hard running plan for this. I'm just having a bit of fun. We can see it's quite sharp in places. So what I am going to do is I'm just going to smooth it off a little bit. So I can either use the default smooth tool that's just up here. Just go through. We've also got a smooth with geometry, so smooth the surface mesh without changing its original shape. This is really good for pieces such as this, because it's going to allow me to smooth up areas without actually changing what the geometry looks like. It's pretty helpful just over here as well, where we've got these points. But this is one of those opportunities where you can just kind of take your time and move through it and think about details if you're electing to do some sculpting on your object. Another thing that I'm actually going to use, I'm going to find this stamp repeatedly along a pattern. There we are. And what I found with this one, if I reset my tool, I brought the size and the strength quite low down, but what I'm going to use with this is actually make these kind of dappled effects, make it look a little bit roughly hewn. So all I'm going to do is it's got stamp on by default. I'm quite happy with this checkerboard stamp, but if you want to choose one, there are a bunch of defaults in here. If we just go to pick stamp, we can choose from some of these. You might go for something a little bit different. You can even import a stamp, but I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that as we go through. So with this in mind, what I'm going to do with this stamp tool, I've just closed my tool settings quite sillily. I do want to adjust the sizing and strength of my tool, because once again, if I just start painting on it, it's just ruined everything. So holding B, that's B for Bravo, I will just make my brush a little bit smaller. And what I'm also going to do, holding M for Marco, I'm just going to bring my strength down on this, and it might take a while because it's really high by default. And then I'm just going to do a test and see how it's looking. I don't like how soft that is currently looking, so I'm just going to increase my strength a touch. We'll do it a little bit more. We're currently on 2.45. Let's just put that up to 3 and see how we find it. And that's looking a bit stronger. And I might turn on my soft select for this, not my soft select, sorry, my steady stroke for this, but I just want to fill this bottom area with all this textured detail. And more than anything, one of the reasons I'm doing this isn't necessarily to make something cool that I like, although I do. It's also to show you how we can utilize this high poly workflow to a greater degree. Rather than just sharpening edges or adding in geometry, we can actively start building pieces up on this and carving detail in. This will be even more helpful as you go through and potentially utilize something like ZBrush, for example, or any other sculpting softwares. You might have already done a little bit of work with something like Blender's sculpting tools, which are really powerful. So just around here where I'm going across the edge, because I don't want it to come out too much for when we do our bake, I'm just going to lower our strength a touch. And I'm also going to make it a little bit smaller. But I just want this kind of rippled pattern. And because I've got that symmetry on it, it is actioning on both sides. We can see it starting to impact. There we go. I'm just taking my time. This is the biggest thing with sculpting. Don't be afraid to undo, and just take your time as you move through. There we go. And it's looking a bit messy right now, but I will go through and clean this up with some smoothing just to clean it. For this last bit, I am going to turn my steady stroke back on as well, just to make my life a little bit easier. One of the things with this as well, you might find this a little bit jarring at times. You might jump straight into sculpting and absolutely love it, but I can't stress enough how important it is to just practice and take your time, and don't expect everything to be perfect the first time you do it. I'm also being mindful of how close to the edges I get for when I am actually mirror it. I don't want to adjust the placement of that center line too much, just for when we do that mirror, it might not work as intended. And there we go. Just bringing it through, adding this like dappled, roughly hewn texture to our asset. And I'm quite pleased with how that's looking so far. So I'm just going to do one last pass over it with our smooth while maintaining edge detail. We've just got this piece here. So I'm just going to increase the size a touch and we'll smooth over. And what this is doing is it's just cleaning up some of the geometry without affecting this detail that we've carved into it, which is what we want really. There we go. And if I just press Q again, I can click off this and see the detail there. Now, there could certainly be more work that I put into this, but for the sake of demonstration, I'm quite happy with where I am with that. So the next step that I'm going to need to do is actually mirror it. And one thing to bear in mind with your mirror, it might take some time to actually action. So just be a bit patient with this. I'm just going to go to Mesh and Mirror. And off the bat, it's doing okay. But one thing that I've found when I've previously done this is it can sometimes, depending on how many polygons we've got, it can take a while for this to work. So I'm just going to change my axis to Z and my direction to plus. And here's where it's taking a little bit of time as Maya calculates how to merge it all together and build it. It's not taken too much time that time, which is really, really good to see. If I just click off this, I've now got that consolidated model with the carved detail. One thing to bear in mind with the sculpting, like I say, really take your time and play around with the plethora of tools that we've got. I've only shown you that basic sculpt and that basic stamp pattern tool and the smooth, but play around with the other ones such as pinch and flatten and see how they can function within the context of it. Now with our sword, if I go back to Substance Painter, you can see that I've actually put this point in here. Bonus points if you know the reference. But with this in mind, I've made that image in Photoshop as something that we can work with. So we're just going to very quickly go through the process that I've done to build that and how you might ultimately use something like that to build a stencil or a pattern. So going into Photoshop, I'm just going to start out by building a new canvas, and I'm going to set this to 1024 by 1024 pixels just to make it perfectly square. So if I hit create, I'm all set up now. So the way that I've worked with this is the stencil that I'm building is from a game called Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. You play as the child of a blacksmith. Your father has a particular maker's mark that goes on all of his swords. So I thought it'd be a nice reference to throw it in there. I will put the image on the now for you if you want to utilize the same image, but I just want to work through the very basic process that I've used to create it. It's by no means perfect, but it does the job. So I've got this image here, which has got the symbol that we're working with on it. It's just an M intersecting with a J. And I'm just holding Alt and dragging it to make it larger. And I'll just hit tick. I'll just hit the tick box up here to finalize that transformation on that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to go to my selection tools, and up here we can find one for our lasso. By default, it just looks like a lasso just up here. But if I right click on it, I can actually go to magnetic lasso or polygonal lasso. For this, we're going to use our polygonal lasso actually. And what this is going to do is just allow me to draw some points together and trace the shape of this point. I can still use my normal navigation, so I'm just holding space and dragging my left mouse button to move my viewport. And I'm just going to trace around this character point. There we go. Just taking my time on the J because it's got a bit more curvature than everything else. And I'm not fussed about being this absolutely perfect, otherwise I would take quite a bit more time with that. But we're just going to trace this overall shape. And if I ever make a mistake, I can just press the backspace to go back, similar to our multi-cut tool. Just bringing this together, and I can just link it up by clicking the last point, and that's given us this little point. So what I'm actually going to do now is I'm just going to right click on this, and what we're going to do is hit make work path. And at tolerance I'm quite happy at pixels, but this is just going to give us this sort of shape. If I just hide this layer, it's just going to give us. So we've got that path now. All we need to do is just create a new layer. So you can see I've already made one just there. But we can just add a new one, a blank layer just over here. I'll hide the original one that has our image, and if I just go to paths with that layer selected and right click on our work path, I can just hit fill path, and I don't need to change much here. I don't want to adjust the feathering or anything like that. I'm just going to hit OK, and it's going to inherit from your foreground color, which mine is set to white. Do make sure that you've set that color to white, and we're just going to click OK. And now if I hide that background, I've still got that path, but I've just got this M intersecting with a J as a color image. And it's really important that we have this color of white because it works as part of an alpha channel, where it works as part of what we call an alpha map within Maya. So I'm going to export this with transparency in a minute, and anything that's transparent is just not going to be registered with the software, but anything that's white is going to be interacted with as signal that the stencil in Maya can utilize. So with that, all I need to do is just go to File, and rather than Export, we're actually just going to go to Save As. I just need to apply that transformation, and you can see I've got one from earlier, but with that I've actually gone to Save As Type, and I've saved it to a TIFF file. This is because Maya particularly likes TIFF files. They are a bit larger, but they hold a lot of data. But I'm just going to call this Martin's Mark. You might have done this same process for something a little bit different, which is perfectly fine. But I'm just going to hit Save. It's going to ask me if I want to replace because I already have it. I do want to. However, one thing to bear in mind is I'm actually saving this in my source images folder. So in my fantasy sword, I've gone to source images, found a place there, saved it as a .tiff, and hit save. And the reason I'm going to my source images folder, it's not going to allow me to do it because I've already got it open elsewhere. So we're just going to call this Martin's Sword 2, or Martin's Mark, sorry, 2. It's because Maya's interacting with it. But we're working with this in our source images folder simply because Maya will default to it. It's about making our life easier. So the only thing we need to actually work with on this is we just need to make sure we save transparency as part of this. We want that alpha channel, so it's got transparency in its background. I'll hit OK. Don't worry about including layers for our file size. This is a working file. Ultimately, it's not going to get submitted or put into a game. It's just something we're going to let Maya use. So I'm going to hit OK. We've got that set up. And now, with our sword selected, I'm going to go to our sculpting tools and find this stamp tool. And I'll just open that and go to my tool settings, and we'll find stamp, and I've just reset my tool so I can show the process. By default, it has a different stamp on it. However, we can go to pick stamp. It's going to open up our content browser, which is all in a load of program files, but we can just hit import, and it will default us to our, well, it should default us to our source file images. It's not this time, but if I just go to source images, I can find that Martin's Mark II, hit open, and exact same tools for our sculpt. I'm just going to hold B to make our brush a little bit smaller. It's less of an issue with stamps because we drag to build them, but we do need to make sure we lower that strength quite a bit. And rather than using symmetry for this, I'm going to turn symmetry off because this is, you know, lettering. It goes in a particular orientation. So what I do want to make sure I do is just on both sides, I can just drag, orient, adjust the size a little bit. And with that, it's gone through. Our size is still far too strong, so it's making the shadows look a little bit off. So I'm just going to bring that size down to 0.5, and we'll give it another go. And I'm just making sure that I've oriented my camera by hitting the view cube in the top right corner, just so we're dead on. And I'm just going to find a central point. I'll drag out from it, and I'll stamp it on. Still too much, so we're just going to go to 0.1. There we go. Apologies, I was adjusting my size and not my strength. That's why it's not changed at all. We'll just increase that strength a little bit. And one thing you might find is, like when I'm doing this, it's still looking all blurry and not particularly nice. And this is because we just, no matter what we do to our strength settings or anything like that, we've just not got the polygonal resolution to work from it. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to smooth my sword again, and it is going to make it process a little bit longer, but it's going to give us more to work with. So now with that object selected, I'll go back to that stamp tool. I'll orient my faces, well, my camera, sorry. We're just going to try this again now. I'm quite happy with our strength at 2. So let's drag it out. There we go. We will bring that down to 0.1 actually. And we'll just drag that stamp. And there might be a bit of trial and error on your part. You might get it first time, at which point brilliant. But we'll just bring that through, and I'm going to do the same thing on the front as well. And it's just allowing us to make this little bit of high poly detail that we might want for our piece. Now clicking off it, I've got that stencil put into place, and we've just sculpted some high poly detail. In future modules, you will look at softwares like ZBrush, which are much stronger and much better suited to this sort of workflow. But for now, this is perfectly fine for just adding a little bit of detail here and there. So with that, all I'm going to do to finalize this on my high poly, I'm just going to go to edit and delete all by type and hit history, because we have made changes to this by our sculpt. And I'm also going to export these pieces. As we did with our chest, we need to make sure all of these overlap with one another. So I'm going to hit my sword LP. I'm going to go to File, Export Selection, and it's just going to go to our scenes. You can see I've got some work from earlier, which we don't need to worry about, but I'm just going to call this first one sword_LP and hit Export. And then we're going to do the same, but this time with our, I've missed a step. For our sword LP, we are also just going to add a material to it. So for the handle, the hilt, and the blade, I'm just going to hold right mouse button, go to add favorite material, and hit standard surface. And I'm just going to call this standard surface blade, not blade, sorry, fantasy sword. And it just keeps naming conventions in a good way. And with that, I'll just select our low poly once again. I'll go to export it, so sword LP. And that high poly, we don't need to worry about the material, but I'm just going to select those and go to export selection and call this sword HP. And it's going to take a bit longer for your high poly to export simply because there's a lot more data to it. But with that, we've now got our sword actually made up, detailed, and put into a nice well, we've got these two different versions, one high poly, one low poly, each with, you know, their own benefits and drawbacks. One has a lot of detail while not really being appropriate for engine usage. One doesn't have that detail but is nice and low poly, ready to go into engine. So in our next video, we're going to look at actually texturing it in Substance Painter and thinking about what we can do with our bake alongside that. Should you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to myself or your tutor in class. But with that, have some fun with your high poly sculpt, play around with the tools and think about what detail you can put into your original asset for this. With that, do take care and I'll see you in the next one.